Alrighty, we're on day 2 of the Wagner mutiny, which yesterday I was questioning whether or not it was a psyop. I wasn't sure. I don't like to take anything really at face value, especially when it comes to military conflict. But waking up this morning and seeing everything that's happened looks pretty darn real. I think this is going a little too far to be a psyop. So I think we can put that behind us. This definitely seems to be an earnest attempt by Prigozhin and Wagner to launch an insurrection against at least one part of Putin's government, that being the Ministry of Defense. So far, from what I've heard, and we haven't gotten an update from the Wagner guys in a few hours, I think. And by a few, I probably mean like 3. We have not heard any change in that so far. They're saying, hey, we're going to go to Moscow. We're going to execute Shoigu and Gerasimov and replace them. Although they didn't say execute, but they said, we'd really like to speak with them. And so far what's happened is they've gone to Rostov, which is a city in, it's a Russian city that's close to Ukraine. And apparently, I don't speak Russian, but apparently, in one of his videos, Prigozhin actually worded it as, hey, I've sent troops back across the border to Rostov, which that's kind of undermining the entire Russian war by saying that, because he's implying that, well, if he had to send them back across the border, he's saying that they're in Ukraine now, when the Russian position is that these places that the Russian military and Wagner are holding in Ukraine are now a part of Russia because they've annexed them. Yet Prigozhin is still calling them Ukraine. Very interesting. So anyway, went back to Rostov and captured the headquarters of the Southern Military District of Russia. You know how the U.S. has like CENTCOM and NORCOM and PACCOM and what are the other ones? Spacecom. They have all of these different commands of organizing the American military. Of course, in the case of the American military, it's spread across the entire galaxy because you have districts in the American military that are responsible for, North and South America, for Africa, for the Middle East, for Europe, Asia, and, the Pacific, and of course for space, just all of space. The Russian military divisions are a little less ambitious. They're only divided across Russia. So the Southern Military District in Russia is not referring to the Southern Hemisphere. It is just referring to a southern region of Russia. And so Prigozhin has captured the command center for the Southern Military District. And in a picture, which, I guess I'll just make it well, I don't know, we'll put it up. No promises, but he was pictured with who appears to be the deputy defense minister. So the guy under Shoigu directly, which seems a little strange. Because you would think that the deputy defense minister would be back in Moscow, at the Ministry of Defense, working under the Minister of Defense. But no, actually, he is in Rostov with Prigozhin, awaiting the arrival of Shoigu, his boss, and Gerasimov, who, I forget his exact title, but I think Gerasimov is like the equivalent of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And so the plan so far seems to be, hey, we've captured this important building. We have some leverage now, and our opening negotiation is we want to talk to Shoigu. Now, I don't think there's any chance that Shoigu or Gerasimov, let alone both, would go to Rostov to just have a friendly chat with Prigozhin. And so as I guess you could say, a counter to their refusal, Prigozhin has vowed to just march all the way to Moscow. And apparently the Wagner guys are just driving single column down the highway. The M4 highway, I believe, it's like, you know, the equivalent of the interstate highway here in the U.S. And they were driving along, and at least one of their trucks, which I'm sure they have thousands of pickup trucks, one of the Wagner trucks got blown up. And so that appears to be the first case of Ruski on Ruski violence that I've seen, but I've seen more videos since. I've seen helicopters. I've seen what is allegedly a Wagner guy, or guys, whatever, shooting down Russian military helicopters. And, I mean, that's a big step. That's kind of how you know, okay, this is no psyop. They're not playing at this. They're serious. They're actually killing each other. And this is how, this bumbling is exactly how the Yugoslav wars started. Because if you remember, it was actually a shooting down of a helicopter that was the first shot of the Yugoslav wars. At least I believe. I might be getting my timeline off a little bit. But anyway, oh, actually, no, I think I'm correct, because Slovenia was sort of like the least, the least Yugoslav of the Yugoslav republics, and so Slovenia was the first one to break away. And also, you know, it's on the north, so it's kind of, it's the closest to NATO and the Western countries, and so it's kind of like, you know what, we were a part of Austria for a long time, so, I mean, we kind of like these Western guys. Well, let's just kind of distance ourselves from Belgrade. And Belgrade, at first, you know, they didn't do anything. But the Slovenes, with their own little regional paramilitary, went and blockaded, I guess you could say, the Yugoslav military base, because of course Slovenia was a part of Yugoslavia since 1919, I believe. So yes, the Yugoslav military had a base, at least one, in Slovenia. So these guys were cut off, and, you know, I mean, these are conscripts, these are just, you know, regular soldiers or whatever, and they didn't have food or anything. They had no way of getting in or out. So the Slovenes just kind of, you know, were, I mean, it was like a medieval siege. And so from what I remember, was there was a helicopter that was flying over, that was going to the base, that I think was bringing them food. And the Slovenes shot it down because, you know, it violated their airspace, because it didn't have permission to, you know, fly to that base from them, even though they just declared independence, like, you know, 24 hours earlier. You know, it's like they declared independence and then didn't think about how do you get the Yugoslav troops out. They didn't even ask. They're just like, you know, no, it's off limits. And then they shot it down. And then it's like, well, now we have to fight you because you shot down one of our helicopters, and all it was doing was carrying food. And I mean, you could see how, in some of the videos, how confused the Yugoslav soldiers were, because they're like, wait, you know, why are you fighting us? We're your military, you know. I was drafted and then sent here, you know, like, I'm not in a war zone. I'm in my own country. Why am I being shot at? It was just, I mean, it was bizarre. But then we know what the Yugoslav wars turned into. It went from that to, to just one of the most brutal wars in general, where everyone was just killing each other. And so this is how those sorts of things start. So now we need to watch for cracks in Russian unity. But unlike in Yugoslavia, we're not looking for different. I don't think that we're going to see individual, like, regional governments in Russia start to. I don't think that's where the cracks will form. I don't think it'll be in the regional governments, because I don't think, to my understanding, I don't think the regional governments, like, have their own militias or anything, or national guards. I don't think they have any military power. I think it would have to be more like Spain, to where you just started to see generals defecting and taking, you know, the soldiers under their command with them. You know, once the wasn't it? Gosh, I know that Franco wasn't the leader at first, and it was only after a bunch of guys got killed under mysterious circumstances that Franco ended up the leader of the revolution against the Spanish Republic. But I think he was the first one to move because he was in Morocco, and so that was where the Republic had the least amount of control anyway. And I think it was after Franco's mutiny that you had other generals starting also rising up and saying, hey, I'm going to commit my troops to this rebellion. And then, some of the generals said, well, I swore a loyalty oath to the Republican government, so I have to fight for them. In that case, though, the defecting generals had political differences with the government. That's why they turned on the government. They did not want to serve under that government anymore. They decided that the Republican government had gone too far in a lot of their policies, and they said, you know what, we can't take this anymore. You're destroying our country, and we're not going to protect you. So it's time for you to step aside. In other words, the Spanish Civil War started as a coup that was just not clean. It was not a clean break. It was supposed to be a coup, and coups are over very quickly. What is going on in Russia is not a coup. It's far from a coup. It's not even a civil war yet, because there is not enough people on Prigozhin's side. Prigozhin, from what we understand, is starting with 25,000 troops, which that's a lot of people depending on how you use them. But if you're just talking about a conventional war, Wagner versus the entirety of the Russian military, well, the Russian military can conscript new guys, for one thing. Wagner cannot now. They're capped at their 25,000, and so it only goes down from there. And so, sure, if you use them as guerrillas and spread them out and, didn't cluster together, maybe an unconventional war, 25,000 guys could, bring down the Russian military. But I don't see how they would do that the way they're going about it. If things continue as they are, and nobody defects over to Prigozhin's side, it's hard for me to see how this goes his way in the long run. Now, it might take a while. It would cause a lot of political damage for Putin's government. I think that's assured, no matter what. But I don't see much of a political program that Prigozhin is espousing that could rally other people and, more importantly, other military leaders to his side. His argument seems to be, I don't like the current military leaders, and I want there to be different military leaders. I don't like Shoigu, so I just want to remove him and put someone else in his place. And I don't think the staffing decision is a hill that most people in Russia would be willing to die on. That's not something that people are going to turn against their own government for. Though it is interesting that he has been able to get so many people on his side already, that he's been able to keep his soldiers, who are just mercenaries, on his side, and said, yeah, we're going to go overthrow the military. And, and they're just like, okay, we'll go along with that. That shows that he does have some power of persuasion. I think if I were in their situation and the boss said, if I was working for, I don't know, like Blackwater or something, or an American contractor, and Eric Prince, came down, to the base or, wherever Blackwater mercenaries go, and Eric Prince is like, yeah, so our next target is the Secretary of Defense. We got to take him out. He's no good. He's incompetent. And we got to get Milley too, because Milley's he's crying about white rage all the time, and he's an embarrassment. So we got to get rid of these two. I'm like, I'm not getting involved in that. I don't like those guys either. I don't like the American Secretary of Defense or the Joint Chiefs staff. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. These guys are clowns. But I'm not sticking my neck out trying to take them out. But yet, Prigozhin has rallied 25,000 men to do just that. Plus, he now has the deputy defense minister on his side. who I guess thinks that there's a chance that Prigozhin wins, and that presumably he would become the new defense minister if they just get rid of Shoigu. Now, the big elephant in the room here, which I completely forgot about, I wasn't avoiding on purpose, is Putin's response. There was, some suspicion that, well, I mean, Prigozhin wouldn't do something like this without, coordinating with Putin, right? I mean, he wouldn't embarrass him this much because they're supposed to be friends. So maybe Putin is using Prigozhin, and that this is, a psyop or false flag of some kind. Maybe Putin wants an excuse to get rid of Shoigu. All these things. No, that is not the case, apparently. Putin came out and gave a big speech condemning Prigozhin, said that this is treason, and all the stuff that you'd expect. So no, I think it's safe to say at this point that Prigozhin has actually gone rogue. The Wagner PMC, was it a private military contractor or is it a private military corporation? Never knew really what PMC is supposed to stand for. Anyway, they are at war with Russia effectively. So that's a pretty significant development in the Ukraine war, that Ukraine was fighting, two pretty distinct factions, the Russian military and Wagner. And one of those factions has just switched sides, apparently. I mean, Prigozhin has talked about how this idea that Ukraine was attacking Donbass is all a lie, and it was all made up by Shoigu because Shoigu just wanted to start a war with Ukraine. It seems pretty clear that Prigozhin has turned against the idea of the war in Ukraine entirely. And so that whole faction can essentially be taken off the board, which is going to have, I would think, a big impact moving forward on the war there, when you take a major faction and just neutralize them, or not neutralize them. They're now fighting their former ally. Russia is now in the position of having to ward off an invading army while invading another country. So as it stands, I think that in the end, Wagner will be defeated, but things can still change. People could start to defect to their side. This is very, very early, as you all know. So who knows, maybe in a week, maybe if Wagner has a couple of victories or something like that, then maybe one Russian general will move over, something like that. But let's be clear, this does not seem to be, this is not the kind of revolution in Russia I think that the Western so-called experts have been predicting, that, the war is just so unpopular and people in Russia just love Ukraine so much that they want to switch sides and fight on Ukraine's side. Prigozhin is kind of saying that stuff, but that's not his main point. His main point is, I personally dislike Shoigu. That seems to be the biggest thing. And you haven't heard anyone else other than Prigozhin talk. So he is the voice of this uprising now. This is not an uprising to get rid of the Russian military so that he can pull all troops out of Ukraine. I don't think yet, although that would kind of be consistent with what he said so far. So, you know what, who knows? I've been going on for almost 20 minutes. We're going to get more information. I don't need to speculate beyond what I already have. So with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.